Just dip our toes into the European debate. Amanda, have you made your mind up yet? Because at the moment, I understand you are undecided.
I am undecided at the moment.
Lots of our viewers might be the same.
Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm organising a series of events that we're going to be having in Derby, because I think it's really important that people can see both sides and make up their own minds.
Liz Kendall, no such doubts for you. You are Labour's EU champion for the East Midlands. How are you going to campaign, and how are you going to avoid generating more heat than light, which has been an issue heretofore, hasn't it, really?
Well, I think a lot of people still are undecided about whether or not Britain should remain part of the European Union. I think in the end they're more likely to listen to employers like Rolls-Royce and Toyota, both of whom have come out this week to say we should remain. They're worried that if we leave it could increase prices, make them less competitive and eventually affect jobs. So my job is to make sure those voices are heard, because I think they'll be the most convincing for the public.
OK, well, Amanda, I mean, what's causing you doubts about this? As a politician, surely
yes.
you should have a view.
Yeah. Well, for me, I'm trying to look at both sides, and I am leaning towards coming out. But before I make that decision, I want to really have a look at the facts. And I think a lot of people are struggling with the facts. And it's when you talk about large businesses, absolutely they're saying stay in. And yet there's been a small business report as well where they're saying they recommend coming out. So what I want to do is have a considered opinion, look at all the facts and think which way we should be going. And I say enabling my constituents to do that as well.
OK, well, thank you for now. So Liz clearly in favour there, Amanda undecided, possibly heading for Brexit. But plenty of our politicians, of course, are pro-Brexit. We heard from one of them last week, Nigel Mills, the Amber Valley MP, and we'll be hearing all of the arguments, of course, in the coming weeks. Next, though, something closer to home, quite literally, because homelessness is on the rise again in the East Midlands, and there could be worse to come. Charities say their funding is being cut back and some services have stopped entirely, leaving people facing the prospect of losing their homes with no support to help them cope. Here's our political editor, Tony Rowe.
An image this week hard to forget, a homeless man falling 20 feet out of a recycling skip. Hiding out of sight to keep warm, 11 people have been crushed to death in the last 5 years. Charities do a lot in the East Midlands to prevent people sleeping rough.
The absolute worst, I was actually stood at Beeston Railway Station and I was waiting for the fast train to come through to go to London. I couldn't see any way out. I'd lost everything.
I think I would have been on the streets and I don't think I would have coped. But being in here, it's gave me that second chance of starting a new life.
Derby hit a peak of 47 rough sleepers 2 years ago, but against the national trend there's been a big fall to 10. In Nottingham the numbers have risen steadily, with 14 people sleeping on the city's streets in 2015. In Newark, the latest snapshot shows 10 sleeping rough. Leicester has had the biggest problem. At one point 50 were on the streets. The number's fallen, but are on the up again, 22 in 2015.
This is the kind of place where people spend the night. It's pretty grim. The government has promised to spend more on keeping people off the streets, £139 million over the next 4 years.
But funding is uncertain. Framework in Nottingham knows from the end of this month, money from the county council they used to help people keep off the streets will go.
I think primarily central government needs to take some responsibility for this issue. We used to have a very effective programme called Supporting People with money ring-fenced for this kind of service. Governments of all parties have made the decision to get rid of that, and it needs to come back, and it needs to come back urgently.
People are going to get themselves into financial difficulties and people are going to end up taking their own lives because that prevention services isn't there. And it's soul destroying, because at the end of the day, those of us that have been through it can actually see the effects that this is actually going to be having on people that need the services.
In Derby, the YMCA gives shelter and support to 160 young people, turning lives around, like Michaela, who was kept off the streets and is now hoping to get a job.
I've overcome a lot more boundaries as well. Like, I'm more confident in myself, I'm doing more things. and I look forward to getting up every day.
We lost a lot of funding, and I suppose the thing that worries me is the funding that we've got at the moment is time limited, and we've just been really creative with the resource that we've got, hence the reason we're doing a substantial amount of fundraising.
The government insists they have protected homelessness prevention funding and expect local authorities to provide quality advice and assistance to all those that approach them for help.
Amanda, I know you have a keen personal interest in this. On Friday you did a sleep out for the YMCA to raise funds, which is great, but isn't funding for homelessness, shouldn't that be a central government funding issue and not down to generous donations from charities?
I think you know, first of all, going back to Friday, one of the important things was doing the sleep out, and I've certainly, you know, having been homeless myself, I think it's really important that we do know exactly what it is like and the issues. And one of the things we also need to consider, that rough sleeping, which was what happened on Friday, is different to homelessness. Absolutely, we have a responsibility to make sure that people aren't homeless, also that people don't rough sleep. It is very complicated, but we certainly have been making steps, the government have been making steps to ensure that less people are homeless.
We'll come back to that in a moment perhaps, but Liz, what do you think are the causes of homelessness? Why is it happening when Britain is supposedly the fifth richest economy on the planet?
Well, look, the number of people sleeping rough has almost doubled under this government, where it was cut by 60% under the Labour government. And as Amanda says, the issue of homelessness is much, much bigger. The root causes of the problem is there's not enough affordable housing to buy or to rent. We have seen real issues with councils not being able to build more social housing as well. You know, we have seen the lowest levels of house building over the last Parliament since the 1920s. In the end, we've got to have more affordable homes to buy and to rent. That's good for people, it's good for the construction industry, and it's good for jobs. I'd like to see councils have powers to borrow to build more social and affordable housing, and I also want to see the government investing in the construction industry and in house building on a much bigger level.
Amanda, isn't that a point? Your government has failed on housing.
No, we're doing an awful lot on housing, and we are certainly got a commitment with the Help to Buy and other schemes. But just going back to your question, which was specifically, you know, why do people sleep rough? And I think it's important that we understand that that often, you know, circumstances unfortunately mean that these people have no choice but to sleep rough. And if you looked at Gillian from the YMCA, and again, as you know, I'm a mentor there, there's a lot that needs doing to turn these chaotic lives around, and that's certainly one of the things that the YMCA is doing, and why I slept out on Friday, because whatever we do from a building housing, which is really important, we have to take care of these individuals who, through no circumstance of their own, find themselves in that situation.
Is there a suspicion, Liz Kendall, that sometimes Labour councils use the lack of funding or cuts in services in emotive areas? Do they use that as a kind of stick to beat the government with? I think the phrase is shroud waving.
I think it is emotive and emotional to have people.
But shouldn't Labour councils be doing more to fight for funding?
Well, you know, my council's had £150 million worth of cuts. And when you look at counties like, you know, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, they've seen their spending power increase. It is an emotional issue, and I think in the 21st century, in one of the richest countries in the world, we shouldn't be having people sleeping rough. And as I said, under the last Labour government, the numbers were cut. What's really important is that we focus on prevention. Many people may have mental health problems, they may have drug and alcohol problems, and we need to join those services up to prevent people from becoming homeless in the first place, as well as having the support to get them back on their feet through programmes like Supporting People.
Amanda, just briefly, what was your story? How did you become homeless?
Well, just like quite a few people at the YMCA, in actual fact, it was just a case that, you know, my mum was an alcoholic. It made it very difficult to stay at home. We didn't. It was not the easiest of situations, and I wasn't a perfect teenager either, to be fair. And when you have all these circumstances flying, there luckily I had a really good friend who was able to take me in. But that feeling of despair is very great at that time.
And would you both agree that sort of early intervention, tackling the problem before homelessness happens, is key?
Absolutely right. I mean, Shelter says that across the country, 4 million people are just 1 month pay packet away from being homeless, unless you're very, very rich. You know, most people wouldn't be able to, you know, afford their homes if they lost their jobs in 2 or 3 months. So this is not something that happens just to a few. The potential is there for us all, and we need to get the right support in up front.
Okay, well, thank you for now. We'll move on. It's been a tough few days for supporters of Devolution for Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. All week long, councils across the region have been lining up to reject plans to combine the two counties under one authority. So far, 6 councils have voted no, leaving 13 more to carry on the devolution fight without them. Our political reporter Chris Doidge has been following the saga of the disunited kingdom.
It was meant to be a uniting of 2 ancient rivals, 2 shires brought together under one jointly elected mayor. Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire would set aside centuries of distrust under the banner of devolution to produce a new kingdom, the North Midlands. But the politicians' dream is fading as district councils have been meeting to reject the plan, and the North Midlands dream seems to be going up in flames.
Well, I've spent the week at meetings like this one, and in Amber Valley and in South Derbyshire and also up in High Peak, they voted to reject the devolution deal. So what will happen here tonight? And so Erewash has become the 5th council to reject the devolution deal, and it's done it unanimously.
In the end, Erewash became the 5th district council in Derbyshire to vote not to join the North Midlands.
I feel that we've been trying to hit deadlines all the time, and we hadn't had time to think about it properly, and it keeps changing. The one we saw today was version 26.1. You know, how can we agree to something when tomorrow there'll be 26.2? So we haven't had the time to look at a properly finalised agreement.
Locally, Conservatives have been more sceptical of devolution, but some Labour councils are changing their allegiance and turning north.
I've just got a message through on my phone that Chesterfield have voted to unanimously join the Sheffield City region, so that's another council that's decided not to stick with Derbyshire.
And it's about more than councils squabbling. We were promised that devolution would bring tens of thousands of jobs. Businesses haven't given up hope yet.
The ambition of the economic plan for Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire is to create 55,000 new jobs, and we're on track to do that. What devolution does is provide some more levers and some more funding to enable that to happen sooner and faster. And therefore, it is important that we try and get a devolution deal through. But whether we do that now or whether we do that in a few months' time, we'd rather it sooner the better. But it is up for negotiation. It is a deal.
It looks like the dream of uniting Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire will live to fight another day. The 13 councils which have signed up say they may have lost the battle, but they will win the war to bring new power to part of the East Midlands.
Well, we're joined by our political editor, Tony Rose. So to sort of borrow a phrase from John Cleese, devolution isn't dead, it's just resting.
You could say that. It was a bit of a surprise, I have to say, at this behind closed doors meeting of the 19 authorities. Not all of them went. Some of those had said goodbye and didn't think it was worth going along to say it in person. But I went there thinking it's dead in the water, nothing, they're just going to abandon it. But they came out of that meeting fighting. They're determined to make it work for the 13 because they think that's best for people in the East Midlands. They called themselves a coalition of the willing, and one of their leading lights, Councillor Anne Weston, spoke to us after the meeting.
You've got a group of local authorities that cover a big part of the East Midlands, and that we're determined to continue and do the best job we can for the people of this area.
Well, ministers clearly want all-round agreement, so what's going to be the reaction in Westminster to this?
Well, that's the next step, is to go back to the government with what they have among the 13. And the reaction from the government is going to be very interesting. As we heard in Chris's report there, they're on draft 26 of an agreement. So this has been going on for 12 months. And if you look through that draft report, which has been published by Erewash, in a bit of a spoiler, if you like, there are lots of red typeface where they haven't made a deal satisfactory to the government. So the government's not happy with large portions of that deal. So it makes you wonder whether the government wants this to go ahead.
Well, it does. Amanda Soloway, it is all a bit of a mess, and a lot of the scepticism, as we heard in that report, seems to be coming from Conservative councils. Is that because they're reluctant, they're suspicious of being dominated by Labour in this region, by a Labour mayor and by a Labour majority, if you like, within the devolved region?
I haven't had this announcement is obviously made on Friday, and I haven't had the opportunity to talk to anybody, so I couldn't really comment on that. But I think one of the issues that we do have is there is confusion around what exactly the devolution deal would be, and for me, I think there's a lot of it that does make sense. I think certainly when I talk to businesses, there's a really good and strong case for devolution. But I think what we need to be doing, and we probably need to be looking possibly to Leicester within this, is having a look. Do we need to be looking at more unitary authorities? I'm not quite sure where the discussion will be going with that, but I think this is an opportunity, hopefully, that it isn't dead in the water and that maybe we can still look at something.
Liz Kendall, does it really matter, and would devolution really work? I mean, there's apparently 55,000 jobs that are being talked about. One councillor argued last week that could be created without devolution.
I think that in my own patch, people in Leicester and Leicestershire know better what skills, transport, housing, planning, other infrastructure we need, far better than the man or indeed woman in Whitehall. I really hope the government listens to what local people have said, and if there's a group that wants to go ahead, that they allow them to do that. You can't say you believe in giving people power over their own lives only to tell them, well, sorry, it doesn't fit the perfect format that we want. I think we will get to some kind of an agreement. And it is really important that we do that. National governments cannot do all of these things on their own. We make better decisions locally. I also think it's important that whatever deal is done, it doesn't just rest at that level. I want to see power going down to local communities too. You've got to involve people really locally and not just have these overall broad deals, because otherwise people will feel they've been disempowered.
If the government does come back after this and says, well, there clearly isn't unanimous agreement among all the district and borough authorities in the North Midlands, they're not going to want to go ahead. And once again, you could argue the East Midlands are getting left behind because of a lack of agreement by politicians on the ground. That's concerning, isn't it?
I think we certainly need to, all of us, be considering, the Midlands engine, and I think one of the things that we should be working for, as you saw in the clip, is that Anne was saying it's not gone completely, and I think what we need to be doing is, I agree with Liz completely, is working together to find a solution that actually enables local people to be making local decisions.
We don't want to miss out on these powers. We want to lead in terms of job creation and investment. We want to make sure that our young people get the skills they need to get on in life. We want to build the houses that we need. So I hope we come to some kind of an agreement, and I hope the government actually listens to that and doesn't try and impose a one-size-fits-all.
Tony, do you think the government understands this feeling that we want to go ahead regardless of any disagreements, that it's important for us, or will they just say clearly they're not that bothered?
Well, one source told me this week from Westminster that the deal was dead in the water and had been for several weeks, and that the concern of government was, here you have a North Midlands deal, which doesn't even include the region's airport. And the same person told me that there was great concern, as we've heard here, that we're going to be left behind and the West Midlands engine will steam on ahead, leaving us in the wake unless we can do something to get those devolved powers that are on offer.
It's not beyond the wit of man to actually sort this out. If Chesterfield prefers to go with the Sheffield, let that happen. People know how best their geography and links work. But let's not let the government stop some areas going ahead just because it's not the overall deal they first envisaged.
But just to go back to this issue, why can't we seem to agree in the East Midlands? Is there a particular problem here about consensus?
I mean, I actually think that what we need to be doing is helping people understand, and I think that's something that we could be doing better, actually, because when I'm thinking about seeing the clip that we saw earlier about Chris as an example, I know there's some confusion about what exactly the devolution deal meant, because he was saying, about who's going to have power, and actually I think we need to be explaining what devolution will mean, how it will actually encourage jobs in the region, and how it will enable us to stay ahead as the engine for growth.
Can I just, sorry, very briefly, what's going to happen next? We've not got much time.
It goes to the government, the Treasury, and they will in effect make the final decision on the deal. But they don't want to consider that at the moment. The leaders of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire County Council, they want to plough on and they want to get the best deal.
So it's been an interesting week or two, and we'll have to see what happens. Hopefully we can get some kind of agreement in the future.